welcome to another Princeton Review live stream. Today we are going to be talking about verb tenses. Now there's a lot to know about verbs in general. There's a bunch of different tenses and conjugations and moods even, but today's focus is different tenses of verbs, and we're going to be covering quite a bit. So before we jump into the actual tenses in the lesson, we'll begin with our warm-up as we always do. So go ahead and grab something to write with, something to write on, and let's take a look at our warm-up questions or sentences. So what you're going to do here, label your paper 1 through 4 and mark which sentences you think are right versus wrong. So number 1, Sam had been writing college essays all day when Jill invited her to the pool. I'm not going to say anything else. Mark whether you think it's correct or incorrect. And let's look at number 2. I had already began eating dinner when my mom arrived. Again, mark whether you think it's correct or not. Number 3, by next summer, Lydia will have took dance lessons for 6 years. And the last one, number 4, Roth had been planning to go to the pool until he heard thunder. So I'll give you a few more seconds here to mark down whether you think these are correct or incorrect. If you think they're incorrect, see if you can fix them. And we will come back to these questions at the very end of today's presentation. So let's start with talking about tenses in general. So in the English language, there are 3 basic or primary tenses, right? We've got the past tense, something that happened before, the present tense, something that's happening right now, and the future tense, something that hasn't happened yet. That's your most basic forms, but all of those tenses can be even more complicated, and we can look at them in the simple tenses, the progressive or continuous tenses, the perfect tenses, and the perfect progressive, also known as the perfect continuous tense. So what that means is there are actually 12 different core tenses in the English language, and maybe you've heard of these. If English is your second or third language, you might be really familiar with these. If you take a foreign language, you probably have heard of these tenses in your foreign language, and you might know them as a native English speaker. So we're going to go through each of these tenses today, and we'll have some example sentences and some practice, and then we'll come back to that warm-up at the very end. And if anyone has questions during the stream, feel free to type into the chat, and the questions will be put up on the screen. And for any questions after the live stream, you can type in the comments. So let's begin with the simple tenses. They seem pretty simple, right? We start with the simple past tense, which you can use to describe something that happened in the past, a completed action. It's done. It already happened. Nothing else to say about it. So we could say the flamingo stood. All right, it's happened. The flamingo, at some point, that flamingo stood. We don't know when exactly, but we know that it took place at some point in the past. Super simple, and stood happens to be an irregular verb. So we say I stand, I stood is the simple past. A lot of our regular verbs, to put them in the past tense, we just add ed. We're not going to go into a full conjugation thing today, but just a note for yourself, check out a verb chart if you're not sure about irregular conjugations. So the next tense, the simple present, it's actually not so simple. In its simplest form, it talks about something happening now, like the flamingo stands. That's pretty simple. But the simple present tense can also be used for other purposes. So you can talk about something, a scheduled event that happens all the time. So I could say, I eat pasta every Sunday night. That's not happening right now, but it's a thing that's scheduled and it happens. So I can use that simple present tense for that. Or we can talk about habits and facts. We can talk about a story. So I could start telling a story. So I'm in line at the grocery store and this person cuts me off, jumps in front of me, right? I'm not telling you about something that happens right now. I'm telling you a story about the past, but I'm using the simple present tense. So there are lots of little different uses to use the simple present tense, but just remember it's just one simple verb and there are different conjugations. So normal third person singular, you would just add the s like the flamingo stands. You could say I stand, you stand, we stand, they stand. And our last simple tense is the simple future tense. And it just talks about something that's going to happen later on. So you might have guessed, the flamingo will stand. I will call you tomorrow. We will go to the pool this Saturday. Something that'll happen later. So those are the simples, the simple tenses. And they are the simplest in form. They're only one or two words for the future. But when we start to get into the other tenses, we have to bring in more words to form the tenses. So the progressive tenses, our first here will be the progressive past tense. And as you saw in the first intro slide here, it's also called the continuous. So the continuous past tense, and that's because it's used to talk about some continuous action that happened in the past. So to form this tense, you want to use the simple past form of the verb to be and a present participle. Your present participle is the ing form of the verb. So let's take a look at an example. I was lounging at the beach. So if you look here, you see was is your simple past form of the verb to be, and lounging is your present participle. So I was lounging at the beach. That's different from I lounged at the beach, right? I lounged at the beach, it's done, we don't know how long, it's not a continuous action. Now the present progressive is something that's happening now, a continuous thing that's happening now. So you could say, I am lounging at the beach. And how do you form this? You've got the simple present form of the verb to be and a present participle. So the only difference to form these two tenses is the conjugation of the first thing. So you've got the simple past, the simple present. So I was lounging versus I am lounging. And the simple future is about a continuous action that's going to take place later on. And this is going to be formed with, you might have guessed, simple future form of the verb to be and a present participle. So I will be lounging at the beach. All right. So not too bad, right? We're still in the simpler tenses, and we're going to take it to the next tense now, the perfect tense. So the past perfect tense. When you use this, you want to use it to describe something, some action that started in the past before something else happened. You can also use it if you have an if clause and some conditional form of the verb. So what does that look like? Well, the palm tree had fallen before the hurricane made landfall. So here we have had fallen, and if you look at how to form this tense here, we've got our simple past, just like we did with the progressive tenses, simple past, but instead of to be, now we have the verb to have and a past participle. So whereas the progressive tense has a form of the verb to be and a present participle, we're changing verbs and we're changing participles. The past participle, we're going to look at a chart on the next page of some common irregular past participles, but many times the past participle is just a simple past tense form. So here, the palm tree had fallen before the hurricane made landfall. So these are both past tense. This here is simple past, but had fallen is that past perfect because that happened before the hurricane happened and made landfall. To use the present tense, present perfect tense, you can talk about some action that started in the past and is still going in the future. And this is going to be formed with the simple present form of to have and a past participle. So I have seen a palm tree. I have seen a palm tree. I've seen many palm trees. Past perfect. Now, if you think about how is that different from the past simple, the simple past tense, you would say, I saw a palm tree. I have seen a palm tree and I saw a palm tree. I have seen, I don't know when the person who says that sentence saw it, And I don't really know when the person who says I saw a palm tree saw that palm tree either. But in the simple form, you could say, I saw a palm tree last December. But you wouldn't say, I have seen a palm tree last December. There's a different meaning there. So all these slight nuances are very important. You don't need to focus so much on the names of all of these tenses as how can I use these in my writing to improve the meanings and make sure that everything I'm writing actually makes sense. So let's look at the future perfect tense. We want to use that tense to show that an action will have taken place by some specific point in the future. And to form it, simple future with to have and a past participle. So you could say, by next year, the palm tree will have grown another few inches. So it's something that will have happened by next year. All right. So as promised, here are some irregular participles, past participles specifically. This is not a comprehensive list, but just to give you an idea of some verbs that are a little bit wonky and might actually sound pretty funky if you use them correctly. So your base verb is in this first column, and then the past tense, the simple past tense form, and then your past participle. So to go, you'd say I went, or I had gone. I have gone. Those are different things. Grow, grew, grown. Keep, kept. Here's a fun one. Swim, swam, swum. I have swum. Sounds kind of funny because a lot of times we don't use it correctly, but you would say I have swum, not I have swam. So this is just something for your own information, your own knowledge to make note of. You can look up other common irregular verb charts to make sure that you've got all of your funky irregulars down. And I see a question here. Will the SAT, PSAT ask specifically about these tenses? So they will not ask you to identify what type of tense is at play, but you might see something in the writing and language section whereby what's changing in your answer choices is the verbs. And it might be like, they might have you kind of figure out like I have known versus I have knew, something like that. So you just have to know how to correctly conjugate the verb for the sentence. Let me know if that makes sense. So this particular chart is helpful for the SAT and PSAT because we don't use a lot of these tenses too frequently. So it sounds kind of funny. Like I had sung a bunch of songs by the time you came over. I had sung sounds kind of funny, but it's correct. So that's the kind of thing that the SAT might throw on there to throw you off, because if we listen to our ear, we might not get it correct. So if you know your past participles, you'll be in pretty good shape. And your past participle, just so you know, you always want to have the verb have or has or had. Some form of the verb to have is going to go with it. You wouldn't say, I gone to the store. You say, I have gone to the store, I had gone to the store, she has gone to the store, and so on. Okay. So the next tense. Okay, perfect. I'm glad that that answers it. The next and last set of tenses here is the perfect progressive tenses, and it's a mouthful, also known as the perfect continuous tense, because remember, the progressive is also known as continuous. And this one, it's a big, long conjugation situation. So let's take a look. To use the past perfect progressive tense, you want to use that when you're talking about something that had been happening in the past before something else happened. So what does that look like? Well, to form this, you're going to have your simple past form of to have. So what you might have noticed now is with all three of these second, third, and fourth tenses beyond the simple tense, we use the simple version of the verb to have or to be, or in the present past perfect progressive here, a combination of to have and to be. So we have the simple past form of to have, then the past participle of to be, then a present participle. So this is a lot of words, and this particular tense is not so commonly used, probably partially because it's really long and tricky and a mouthful to say. So the fish had been swimming all night when it saw a shark. It had been swimming all night. So been is your past participle form of to be. Okay, so the present perfect progressive tense. We want to use this when we have to describe something that began in the past and is still happening in the present. For example, the fish has been swimming all night. And to form this tense, you're going to use the simple present with the the past participle of to be, the been, and a present participle. So we have had been swimming in the past perfect progressive versus has been swimming all night. And the present perfect progressive tense sounds a lot like the past perfect tense, right? Because they both began at some point in the future and they can both be happening now. So what is the difference between the two? Well, you could say, I have been to the Outer Banks. That would be your present perfect. I have been to the Outer Banks. To put that into the present perfect progressive tense, you could say, I have been going to the Outer Banks every August since 1991. So there's a difference in the meaning there, right? They're both things that have happened and they can still be happening in the present. But I have been to the Outer Banks does not say that it's a continuous thing. It could mean that I went 3 times, or maybe I only went once. With that information, we don't know. But I have been going indicates that it's something that's happened more than once. It's a habitual thing. So let's look now at our very last tense, the future perfect progressive tense. And we're going to use that to talk about a continuous action that will be completed, will have been completed at some point in the future. So simple future form of to have plus the past participle of to be and a present participle. So we could say, by tomorrow, the fish will have been swimming for 24 hours. So that is our last of the 12 tenses. It seems like a lot, and there's a lot of information to keep straight, but as I said before, keeping the names of them is not so important as knowing how and when to use them. So let's kind of look at a few figures that show all of these tenses alongside one another so you can sort of see how they fit together. So this figure here shows us past, present, future. And this is a sort of timeline. So the past of the past will be our past perfect progressive. To say, I had been studying. This is something that had been already happening. I had been studying. The past perfect would be I had studied. So I could say, I had been studying for 1,000,000 hours when I just finally fell asleep. It's something that had been going on for a while. I had studied is also in the past, but it's at a later point of the past. I was studying, we say our continuous action. And then up here in this simple past, again, we don't know exactly when the simple past took place unless information in the sentence tells us when. I studied last week. I studied for a long time. I studied on Wednesday. So there's just a sense that it's a completed action of the past. It's not a continuous action like the past progressive, where it's I was studying. And then we can go into our presents to look at them. I study. I have been studying. So I have been studying, our present progressive, it started in the past and it's still happening now. I'm still studying. I have studied, that's our present perfect. I have studied, again, you need the rest of the context of the sentence. I have studied for many years. I have studied many languages. And it doesn't specifically give us a when. In the present or past, I have studied means it could be still happening. I am studying. It's happening now and it's still happening. What are you doing? I'm studying, because that's what I'm doing right now when you ask me that. Or what I'm doing right now, I'm talking. And I'm still talking. So it's a continuous action. And then finally, our future, we've got the simple I will study, future perfect progressive. I will have been studying. So by next month, I will have been studying for 19 days straight. Future perfect, I will have studied. And then the future progressive, I will be studying. So lots of information to keep straight here. And I have one more graphic to show all of this information here side by side. So let's take a look at that. A lot of words here, but it's okay. So we have here our past, present, and future. And this is presented in the same order as you saw them today. But if we pretend that our subject is the word the turtle crossed. And here you see, as I mentioned earlier, to usually add a D or an ED to that base form of the verb to create the past tense. And then here's all of your rules. So I'm not going to go through all these rules again, but it's pretty simple. You're kind of like following a recipe to create the tenses. Again, you're going to have, to be, or to be and to have, and either a present or past participle as you create the progressive, perfect, and perfect progressive tenses. All right. Now that we've gone through all of that, we're going to look at 3 new questions before we go back to the cool down. So the first one here, what you're going to do is choose the correct form of the verb and see if you can identify what tense it's in. So by the time I realized I blank my cell phone, I was already on the train. So look at those 4 answer choices here and see which one do you think is correct and makes the most sense, and what tense is it? I'll give you a couple more seconds. All right. By the time I realized I had forgotten my cell phone, I was already on the train. So you have the word had in there, so it's a form of the verb to have. What tense is that going to be? That is the question. And this is what the SAT would not ask you. It ask you what the tense is. The SAT might have a question similar to this, where you have a no change, and then you have to choose the correct verb form. So this is going to be your past perfect, right? Because you've got the form of the verb to have, and then a past participle. Okay, next one. By next summer, Jake blank from college. So all of these answer choices have the word will, which indicates it's probably something in the future tense, but which one is correct? Based on the context of the sentence, only one of these will work. Give you a few more seconds before I provide the correct answer. And this one is going to be D, will have graduated. By next summer, Jake will have graduated from college. And I see a question, so right after we do the next one, I'll come back to that question. So this tense is going to be, let's break it down. It's got future something, and we've got a form of the verb to have, and we've got a past participle. This is going to be future perfect. So the last question here, every Tuesday, she blank, there's a typo in here. Let me just cover up that box. She blank grocery shopping. So take a few seconds here to look for the correct one and think about what tense it is. Okay, so this one is going to be just a simple be, goes. Every Tuesday she goes grocery shopping. And this is your simple present tense. So if you remember, when we talked about the simple present, it doesn't have to be something that's happening now. So it's something that's scheduled or occurs frequently on that same consistency. So if she goes shopping every Tuesday, we would just use the present simple. Okay, and we have a question here. So how do we differentiate between the progressive and perfect progressive. When do we use them? So let's go back to the verb chart on the previous slide so you can see this in action. So we're talking about the progressive and perfect progressive. And you didn't specify whether present, past, or future, but let's look at the past. So if we look at the past progressive versus the past perfect progressive, we see we have was crossing versus had been crossing. So think about how those meanings are different. If I said the turtle was crossing the road versus the turtle had been crossing the road. If the turtle had been crossing the road, that's something that had already happened in the past. So if I said, I don't want to give away anything in our warm-up, so I'm trying to think of a different example. I had been planning to go for a run. I had been planning to go for a run until I found out a storm was coming. I had been planning, so that's the way past, to go for a run until I found out. I found out is your simple past. A storm was coming. So the had been planning was even before I found out that the storm was coming. And then if we look at the past progressive form of what I just said, I was running. I was running when you called me, so I missed your call. So it's something that I was doing it, and I was doing it for a continuous amount of time. Does that make sense? Give you a few seconds there to let us know if that clarifies things. It's good to look at them all in context alongside each other to kind of see how the little differences make a huge difference in the meaning of a sentence based on the tense that you use. Okay, so in the meantime, let's go ahead and go back to our warm-up, which we'll call a cool down now, because we're going to cool down from all of these tenses. And let's see what you guys got. So Sam had been writing college essays all day when Jill invited her to the pool. Question is that correct or incorrect? This one's going to be okay. It's something that Sam had been doing. Sam had been writing. So what tense is that? You've got the had, and you've got the past participle form, and you've got a present participle, writing. So what is that tense? If you think about the question here that I just addressed with the difference between the progressive and the perfect present, we go back to our verb chart to see had been. Well, which one matches up? Because that's one way when you're trying to learn your tenses to kind of go and say, which one has had been? Oh, that's our past perfect progressive. Had been something-ing. Okay, so then let's go back to the last three questions here. And let me just get back to that slide. Number 2, I'd already began eating dinner when my mom arrived. This one is not okay. Why not? What is the problem with number 2? Think about where the error might be. In this case, the tense itself is fine, but it's the participle that's not so fine. So here we have I had already began, and that's not correct. We would have to say I had already begun as the correct participle. You would never say I had began. That is not correct. Even though it might sound okay and is frequently used incorrectly, it is not okay. So I had begun. So think about what tense is this? We've got the to have, and we've got a past participle. So this would just be the past perfect, right? There's no progressive. It's not I had been eating, right? So there's another way to kind of look at the little differences between the tenses. And number 3, by next summer, Lydia will have took dance lessons for 6 years. This one also has a problem. What is the problem? For this one, it's another participle situation. So instead of took, we'll have taken. Will have taken is the correct form. And for SAT type questions, for those of you wondering, and the ACT, this is the kind of thing that you might be tested on. Again, that participle, do you know the correct participle to use? So she will have taken. What tense do we have here? We see the will, so we know it's something with the future, and then have taken, past participle. So for this, we've got the future perfect. And then finally, number 4, Ralph had been planning to go to the pool until he heard thunder. So this one is correct as written. There's no issue here. But what tense are we dealing with? Ralph had been planning. We've got to have, we've got the past participle of to be, and we've got a present participle. So this one kind of looks like number 1, right? These are the same kind of construction. So this is going to be your which tense? Past perfect progressive. All right, so that's a lot of verbs, a lot of little tiny differences that make a huge difference in your writing and the meaning of your sentences. So if you guys have any questions, now is the time to go ahead and type them in. I'll leave this screen up for a moment in case anybody has anything that he or she still wants to look at. But the most important thing with the tenses is really making sure that you know when to use them and what your irregular past participles are. And it's also good to know how to conjugate your simple present and past. And futures, generally pretty simple because you're just using the word will before the verb. Okay, so if nobody else has any questions, then I am going to say thank you all for tuning in today. I do see somebody is typing. All right, no questions, perfect. So thank you guys all for tuning in today, and I will see you next time.